Some messages don't ask for permission. They arrive as if they already know what you need to hear, even before you admit that you need to hear something. Maybe you're here by chance, but that chance has the exact shape of what you've been waiting for. Because certain encounters don't happen in the world, they reveal themselves at the point of maturation of your consciousness. When the field around you realizes that you're ready to see differently, it sends signs, small confirmation codes. This video might be one of them. There is a synchronicity that only activates when you're about to reach something, and it's at that threshold that reality becomes more sensitive to your gaze. Everything responds to the way you observe. Victory is not a future point you need to chase after. It already exists as potential in the quantum field, but it waits for one single action: recognition. To observe is more than to see. It is to vibrate at the frequency of what you want without demanding that it prove itself. And precisely in the moments when victory is closest, many lose focus. They start anxiously searching for external signs, asking for proof, creating noise that delays what was already on its way. But those who observe with awareness do not speed up time. They dissolve distance. Your presence here is an answer, not a doubt. Reality is reorganizing itself around you, and everything depends on how you choose to see the next scene. Because maybe it's already written. And now, all that's missing is for you to realize it. There is a curious stage that many do not recognize, and because of that, they stumble right at the door of what they had asked for so long, an almost invisible space where everything seems still, but inside, reality is already organizing itself to deliver what was prepared in silence. This boundary point between almost and already, between asking and receiving, is also the subtlest territory of the journey. And it is there that the test happens, not a test imposed by higher forces, but an internal refinement. Something like the final sieve before the gold is heated and shaped. What's being measured there is not your merit. It's the stability of your vision. At the moment victory approaches, the most common temptation is to look for confirmation, to look outward for signs that the path is right, a message, a coincidence, an answer, anything that eases the weight of waiting. But that impulse may be exactly what interrupts the flow, because what is forming still has no form. It is in the vibrational field, sensitive, gestating among frequencies that obey not haste, but coherence. By seeking proof, you change your position in the field. You step out of the place of creation and return to the role of lack. You reactivate the cycle of doubt, of demand, of constant confirmation, and every demand is noise. It's like knocking on the door of a fruit still green, asking it to ripen before its time. It might give in, but the taste will be bitter, and the lesson incomplete. The real test is this: keeping your gaze steady even when nothing seems to change, continuing to observe with confidence even in the absence of signs. Not because you've decided to be blind, but because you've started seeing through another lens, that of silent conviction. This kind of gaze doesn't ask, doesn't beg, doesn't justify itself. It simply sustains. To sustain is not to force. It is to align with what is already on its way, without shifting focus to the gaps. Instead of looking for clues in the external world, the invitation is to recognize that the movement has already begun, even if it hasn't yet manifested in matter. That changes everything. You're no longer trying to prove you deserve it, nor looking for excuses to keep waiting. You begin to occupy the space of someone who knows. And this is the most delicate transition in the manifestation journey, to stop seeking evidence and start cultivating presence. As long as your gaze is conditioned by lack, the field responds with scarcity. But when observation vibrates at the frequency of certainty, even what was invisible hurries to appear. It's not about ignoring reality. It's about redefining what you call real. The reality that matters is not what your eyes see now, but what your consciousness sustains, even without guarantees. This is the core of the test: to remain present without hurry, steady without tension, aligned without pressure. Those who remain in this state begin to notice small synchronicities, not because they began searching harder, but because they became someone who vibrates in resonance with what they asked for. External proof is no longer necessary. because the vibration itself becomes the answer. The field does not respond to words, but to the frequency of the observer. And at this stage, there are only two paths. Either you maintain the vibration that collapses the victory, or you fall into the anxiety that drives it away. It's simple, but not easy. But if you've come this far, it's because you're already crossing this invisible territory. And maybe all that's left now is to trade the gaze of someone who asks for the gaze of someone who recognizes, because what's coming doesn't respond to your desire. It responds to the way you sustain it in silence. Desire is a spark, but it only turns into fire when the wood of readiness is in place. While wanting shouts, receiving listens. There comes a point in the journey where the request has already been made so many times with such effort that repeating it becomes counterproductive. Like a plant that, when pulled from the soil repeatedly to check its roots, loses strength and doesn't grow. To want is human, but to receive is a vibrational choice. The difference between the two is not in the intensity of the desire, but in the nature of your posture toward the invisible. Wanting projects outward. It makes plans, calculations, promises. Receiving sinks inward. It knows that what is true doesn't need to be watched. In the quantum field, this is perceptible. The more you vibrate in the state of wanting, the more you reinforce the absence of what was requested. Wanting doesn't collapse possibilities. It keeps them distant, always on the horizon, like mirages that retreat as you run toward them. But the state of receiving, it doesn't seek. It welcomes. There is no effort in the act of receiving. There is space, there is surrender. There is the kind of trust that only comes after all attempts at control have failed. It is a subtle leap to stop saying "I want" and begin to observe as someone who already has. This transition requires more than intention. It demands a re-education of your field of perception. Because behind wanting, there is often still fear. Fear of failing, of being unworthy, of being late, of having missed the chance. Fear blocks surrender. It shifts the observer to a time where nothing can blossom, but the field responds to what is ripe. And what is ripe doesn't ask. It is ready. Think of a seed. It doesn't question the soil, doesn't demand dates, doesn't send signals. It simply surrenders to the fertile darkness and, even without knowing how, breaks through the shell and grows. The seed doesn't want to germinate. It already is what is to come. What you desire already exists on some level of reality. Not as fantasy, but as vibrational potential. A subtle field that awaits the exact moment to materialize, guided by your frequency, not by your urgency. What blocks this birth is not the absence of opportunity, but the insistence on wanting what is already forming. It's like trying to open a flower with your hands without noticing that it is already blooming inside. Receiving is not passivity, it is preparation. It's not about folding your arms, but about aligning your breath with the timing of the invisible, letting reality manifest as an echo of your serenity, not as a response to your desperation. The mind that wants tries to control. The consciousness that receives aligns, and in that alignment everything begins to move without noise. Doors open without being forced. Situations arrange themselves with millimetric precision, and what once seemed distant suddenly becomes inevitable. But this state must be sustained, not by force but by repeated choice. A choice that can begin simply, with a silent affirmation, repeated without anxiety, but with presence. I observe as someone who has already received. Saying this doesn't change the field immediately, but it changes the observer. And those who change the observer change the collapse of reality. Little by little, you stop seeking confirmation in others' words, in the clock's hours, in forced signs. And you begin to realize that the greatest sign is your own stability, that the field doesn't respond to the intensity of your pleading, but to the coherence of your silence. It's not about wanting more. It's about becoming someone who is already prepared to receive. Receiving is a state, but it is also an identity, and that identity reveals itself above all in the way you observe. It's not enough to wish for a new reality. You must become someone compatible with it. So subtle mistake often goes unnoticed, expecting transformation to come before a change in perspective. as if reality first had to prove that it has changed so that the observer can finally allow themselves to feel victorious. But the equation is different. The field manifests what it finds reflected in the one who observes. If the gaze still carries doubt, comparison, or scarcity, what returns is an echo of that. Even if the requests are noble, even if the intentions are clear, the energy that anchors victory is not in expectation, it is in posture. And the posture of the victorious is neither arrogant nor rushed, it is silently convicted. Those who have already won on the inside don't need to convince the world. That gaze carries a different weight. It is not moved by reactivity or urgency. It is the gaze of someone who has recognized their own frequency and now sustains that vibration, with or without witnesses. The question is not only what do you want, but who have you become while wanting? Have you been observing your life as someone who has already arrived at the place they always wanted to be? Or have you been looking at everything as someone who still feels outside, separate, trying to reach? The difference is subtle but decisive, because reality does not respond only to your dreams. It responds to the quality of the being you inhabit while dreaming. There is a kind of serenity that is only found after all attempts at control have failed, a kind of strength that makes no noise, but completely changes the way you walk. Those who already see themselves as victorious walk differently, not out of vanity, but out of presence. That kind of presence is magnetic. It doesn't need to prove anything. It already vibrates like the finish line. And for that reason, everything that has not yet arrived begins to hurry. But that state is not achieved with ready-made phrases, nor with promises to the universe. It is born from an internal shift, a change of position in the field. The question that opens this process is not mystical. It is deeply practical. If I had already achieved what I so deeply desire, how would I be observing this situation now? With what calm would you speak? With what kind of thoughts would you feed your days? What would your posture be in the face of challenges? This exercise, done sincerely, doesn't require you to pretend, but it does require you to allow a new way of seeing to emerge. Not as illusion, but as a fine adjustment to your perception. It is this perception that shapes the field around you, because the field responds to your vibrational signature, and your signature is composed of what you feel while observing the world. If there is still urgency, resistance, frustration, it's likely that your signature is misaligned with what you want to manifest. But if confidence, tranquility, and a sense that everything is already being taken care of begin to arise, then the field starts to respond differently. You don't need to force this process. You only need to begin observing as someone who has already received, as someone who already inhabits the result, as someone who is no longer chasing, but moving with what already is. This kind of observer doesn't need proof, because they are the proof, and this identity is not built with effort, but with consistency. Each new day, choose to observe your own thoughts, your reactions, your gestures, and ask yourself, is this the gaze of someone who has already won? If the answer is yes, continue. If not, gently readjust. Because in the end, reality does not bend to what you desire. It bends to what you consciously sustain. And if you've come this far, it's because that awareness is already awakening. Now, a direct invitation, but aligned with everything we've said so far. Choose a word that represents your victorious identity at this moment. It could be confidence, wholeness, certainty, or whatever resonates most with what you want to anchor. Then, like this video and write that word in the comments as a vibrational seal of your new observation. That small gesture is not just interaction, it's activation. It is you affirming, I observe as someone who has already conquered. After the gaze adjusts and identity settles, something curious tends to happen. A kind of pause, not in time but in the response. It's as if everything slows down. Messages lessen. Coincidences stop. The signs, which once seemed to wave from all sides, withdraw. And in this setting, the mind, I'm still addicted to proof, may start to doubt again. But that silence is not absence. It is preparation. The universe, just like an artist before the final touch on a work, steps back for a moment to silently observe what is about to emerge. It's not abandonment. It's deep alignment. Reality is reorganizing. not to impress, but to deliver with precision. It's common to associate victory with moments of celebration, euphoria, or visibility, but the real cycle that precedes materialization is actually quiet, discreet, sometimes even uncomfortable. The field becomes silent because it is creating. And in this interval, it's easy to misinterpret what's happening, to fall back into anxiety, question everything, try to interfere. But what is already underway doesn't need your interference. It needs your staying power. This is the final rehearsal before the scene is revealed. And as in any great performance, the moment just before going on stage is ruled by absolute silence. The stage is dark, the backstage is still, breath is held. Everything seems still, but it's vibrating. If you can remain present in that silence without demanding proof, something is revealed. A clarity that doesn't depend on words, a certainty that doesn't ask for confirmation. It's as if the very structure of reality whispers something only you can hear. But to hear requires listening without hurry. This apparent void is fertile. It is where the invisible settles, where the details align, where the real movement happens, not in events, but in frequencies. The mind screams for control. Consciousness breathes. And this is your role now, not to accelerate time, but to sustain presence, not to seek new shortcuts, but to trust that the path is already being shaped beneath your feet. The victory that approaches doesn't need to be pulled. It is already being guided by the precision of your vibration. Think of the runner about to start the decisive race. There is a fraction of a second when everything stops. The body leans, the air is held, focus narrows. He doesn't think about victory. He is fully in the moment just before the shot. It's from that kind of presence that true victory is born, a presence that doesn't need to prove itself. It simply remains. Even when everything is silent, even when certainties slip through your fingers and the world seems indifferent. Silence at this stage is a sign that something is ripe. But the field only opens fully when it senses that you are too, that you no longer need stimulation to keep going, that you've turned the key from expectation to readiness. And readiness is silent, not out of resignation, but out of conviction. Nothing is standing still. It's just being woven outside your field of vision. Trusting in this process is perhaps the most challenging step, but also the most necessary. Because it's in this step that the last link with doubt is broken. It's no longer about what is to come. It's about who you are while you wait. This pause is not a test against you. It's an invitation to tune your frequency with even more precision, to breathe within the unknown, to allow the field to bring not what you want, but what matches your true vibration, and that sometimes requires silence even inside your own thoughts. Don't rush to fill this interval with noise. Stillness also communicates. If the field is silent, maybe it's because it's listening to you. The silence that precedes manifestation is not a call to inertia. It is a field of expanded listening, where reality begins to whisper from within, not with words but with subtle directions. At this stage, any movement must be born from listening, because the difference between acting on impulse and acting in alignment is what defines whether you are creating with the field or against it. The restless mind wants to fill the pause with activity. It tries to compensate for the silence with urgency, moving only to escape its own waiting. But that haste contaminates the flow. It takes you out of the natural rhythm of events and puts you back into the rhythm of anxiety. There is a kind of action that is born from fear, another that is born from alignment. The first is restless, seeks to control. The second is precise because it has already been preceded by presence, and only the latter is capable of opening the right doors at the right time without unnecessary effort. You can do 1,000 things and move nothing. Or you can do a single thing at the right moment and see reality reorganize itself before you. But to know what that action is, you need to develop sensitivity, and sensitivity only activates in the internal space that silence has left. It's common to confuse action with agitation, but truly transformative movement is not what keeps you busy. It's what repositions you in the field, and repositioning requires listening, not haste. The key question at this point in the journey is not, what do I need to do, but what is ready to be done through me? This inversion changes everything. You leave the logic of obligation and enter the vibration of cooperation with the field. You stop acting to reach something and start acting as an unfolding of what already vibrates within you. This is inspired action, a gesture that doesn't come from demand, but from alignment. It's as if the world around you starts emitting signs of openness, and you simply respond to them with presence. Nothing forced, nothing rehearsed, a step that is taken because something inside already knows. It's now. When this kind of action manifests, you feel it. There is no friction, no doubt. The movement fits with the same naturalness as a wave meeting the shore. But if you try to force this fit, everything resists. Anxiety distorts perception, making it seem like something needs to be done now and even without clarity. And then come the shortcuts, the decisions made from lack, the steps born from doing for the sake of doing. But every rushed choice creates more layers between you and what was already on its way. True action is not an escape from waiting. It is a continuation of silence. It is the moment when the gesture emerges with the same quality as the listening that preceded it. You feel your body lighter, the air clearer, your intuition sharper. Synchronicity no longer needs to be forced. It presents itself, because you're no longer trying to manufacture the moment. You're present enough to recognize it. This presence doesn't depend on formulas. It is born from your willingness to no longer sabotage yourself with urgency, to accept that not all waiting is inertia, that there is an exact time for each movement to reveal itself, and that you don't need to know everything to trust in that timing. Some decisions that once seemed urgent will simply disappear, and others, which you hadn't even considered, will become obvious. This doesn't happen because the world changed, but because your vibration shifted to a point more coherent with the answer. To act from that place is to join the dance without stepping on your own feet. It's not about doing more, but about doing what has the frequency of truth. And truth is not what calms the mind, it's what resonates in the body as direction. If you are attentive, you'll notice victory does not require blind effort. It requires steps that are born from listening. It does not shout, it invites. And if you know how to listen, you'll know when to say yes. You don't need to chase after victory as if pursuing something out of reach. The truth is that it is already approaching, but not as a distant prize. It reveals itself at the exact point where your gaze stops begging and begins to affirm. Because reality doesn't bend to rushed desires, but to the observer who sustains their frequency even without guarantees. The world doesn't give you what you want. It gives you what you recognize as possible. That's why victory doesn't arrive in a flashy way. It whispers from within, and it's up to you to quiet down enough to hear it. If you were able to stay until here, something in you already knows. Already feels, already vibrates. Maybe it's no longer a question of achieving, but of letting the last layers of doubt fall away, so that what has always been yours can finally manifest. The field is ready. Now, it is your gaze that needs to confirm it. If this video spoke to you, write in the comments, "I observe with readiness." That will be your vibrational seal, your silent declaration that you are ready to receive and not just to desire. And if this content touched something deep, if it made sense for your moment, subscribe to the channel. That shows us that you want more experiences like this. Don't conclude, breathe. The real is approaching.